wind blow mechanically, not manually. Do you want to give us a quick summary on that?
Yeah, I think it was just a question about the wording of the risk assessment. That's all it was. It was just obviously we tried to get as much mechanically before we would enter into chainsaw operations. Pretty sure that's all that was.
Thank you. Callum, again for yourself, I'm afraid you've popped up on the chat a couple of times, and I know you've answered these, but just for those who maybe aren't able to see this, there were a couple of questions on your app. One was about how much time does it take the operator to fill in, and also some details on filling in previous work history.
Yeah, so it was Sam that had asked the first question, and it was basically it takes about 5 minutes per form to fill in. We do a daily task risk assessment, and that takes our operators 5 minutes to fill that in. And then on a Friday, we finish a little bit earlier, and every operator creates a logbook for whatever task they've been doing during the week. And again, that takes about 5 minutes to complete the form. A lot of it's pre-populated, and then we ask them to add in pictures of their week's work to support the information they put in the logbook. Generally speaking, it's about 5 minutes per form. And to answer the other question, it was about how do you upload your work history. So there's a function within the app itself that you can add in as much previous work history as you want. If you've been working in the industry 20 years, you can backdate it as far as you want, and it's just supporting text in there so that you can show who you've worked for, what type of work you've done, and then from that point on, you start using the app to document your progress going forward.
Thank you. If I can just touch now on the questions that we've had sent to us on email prior to the event. The first one, is the IOSH Managing Health and Safety a good course, a good route for an FWM to gain CPD? Chris Pike from the panel, are you able to help us with that?
Yeah, hi Julian.
Can I just jump in there, Chris? Just before you do that, I would like to let everyone know that I started recording so that we can have the question and answer section as a video we can upload, just so that everyone is aware that the recording has now started.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Yeah, thank you, Julian, for the question. IOSH Managing Safely, yeah, it's a good place to start. You need to make sure that if that's the route you're going, that the trainer is covering managing health and safety in forestry. You can't give a course on managing safely in a forestry company without referencing that suite of documents. So you need to make sure that that's being added to. But the group were quite clear that's not the only route, but it would be one way you could approach it.
Thank you, Chris. The next question, how much should be recorded for an experienced chainsaw operator? Callum Duffy, and then can we go to Kathy Gostick from the HSE?
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to sort of go back over where we said in the presentations. So we have to acknowledge where we are right now in the industry. We're on the cusp of a move towards recording daily work activities. So whatever the experience level a chainsaw operator is at, it's almost irrelevant. The obligation to record their competency is the same. An experienced chainsaw operator simply records what work they do in the week and what it entailed of, a description of the type of work they carried out, basically. As explained in my Safe Forestry one, we have the Safe Forestry app, and the logbook form is in there. It's pre-populated with a lot of questions which encourage them to answer the fundamental requirements. It prompts them to add specific pictures of the work and how they planned out that work. All this gives a huge evidence base on what the individual's level of competency with undeniable proof. Whatever any operator does today in regards of recording their competency is going to be better than what they did yesterday. So we must encourage any forward motion, however small these steps may seem. So that's my take on it.
Did you want me to add something, Gillian, on that question?
If you've got anything you'd like to add to that, Kathy, yes, please.
I think Callum's covered it well. However, I have had some queries from perhaps existing experienced operators about how they go onto the system. And I do feel that theirs would be a summary, and then they would, as Callum said, continue from that summary of their past experience with perhaps a weekly log, so that they can just keep that up to date. I think probably the detail would be required would be more for somebody who's at the lower level, and you know, as we all are in our career, sometimes we're starting off, you put more detail in. We do have to look at how existing people would come into the system, and it would be more of a summary and then a weekly log down for what they're doing.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm just going to go back to a question that's sitting on chat. Sorry, Callum, it's you again. How long is it likely to take a new chainsaw operator to reach the highest level of competency?
If the FISA chainsaw competency system is followed from the very outset through to the sort of top level, it's 5 years. 5 years of accumulated time. That's assuming the operator is working the chainsaw pretty regularly, which they need to be to accumulate the hours to jump through the chainsaw technician levels. So it's approximately 5 years it takes to get right up to the very top, which is what we're after. You know, at the moment, we suffer from the whistle-stop tour through the certification without the consolidation process. So we're trying to put something in the middle of that to kind of help people through. And like I said before, it is an outline, and people can continue to get courses as they see fit to do so. And it's just an outline of where you would want to be if you followed it from absolutely having no chainsaw experience through to being very experienced. It would be 5 years.
Thank you. Another one I've got here submitted early. Surely it's my contractor's job to assess chainsaw operators' competency, not mine as an FWM. Joey, Oliver and Ian Calvert as FWM strands, can you help us with that, please?
Yeah, Ian, would you like to go first?
Yeah, well, the textbook answer is from Guidance on Management Health, Safety and Forestry, which is the textbook. Section 2.4, appointing competent contractors. It's the forestry works manager's responsibility to ensure that every individual is competent to perform their element of the work required. So the FWM has a clear responsibility for individual work aspects, and chainsaw is one of them. The contractor has a role in collating and gathering evidence, which the FWM could then review. You want anything, Joe?
Yep, I would say that from table 1 in the GMHSF, that it's the contractor's role to select subcontractors who are skilled and had experience, competency, and have made adequate provision for health and safety. So it's the role of the FWM to verify the contractor's assessment of operators' competency, whether that's through viewing logbooks, conversations directly with the contractor, the subcontractor, or observing work on site to verify it, or through previous work with that subcontractor on other sites or with other contractors. That's all from me.
Thank you. Thank you. The next one we've had in is it's really looking at FWMs and even chainsaw operatives having access to FISA safety guides and using the guides. Sometimes the old guides obviously still feature as checklists, and the question is looking at, you know, how can people on site have better access direct? I think digitally they're looking for the safety guides, and whether they are actually embedded. This is perhaps to those of you on the panel, Callum and Stephen Bartlett. Do you have solutions in your apps that have that facility? The question asks us about, you know, whether they've got that direct access. I mean, of course, we do try and encourage people to have access to the FISA website, where when anything's updated, they can look at that. But I think our inquirer has asked about, you know, is this something on some of the apps that they've got direct access to FISA safety guides? Stephen Bartlett, can we go to yourself? We got
Can you hear
Steve.
me?
Yes.
Joe's allowed me to speak. He's unmuted. Excellent. In my safety, yes, we've got the access to the guides, and what the question was about was whether or not you can actually put a checklist at the front in some way or shape. And there are two ways that you can do that. One is to just have a straightforward checklist in the structured way that I've shown earlier. The other is we work in another sector where induction is important, and a similarly wide-ranging set of topics is covered, and we have questions for each of the topics. And on the induction, there's a process whereby people can access a randomized set of questions, so they get a wide-ranging coverage. And then as they go through their contract period, say several months, each month they're invited to take another test. And in that industry, if people are given a fair chance, they have 3 goes to answer sets of questions. And if they fail a set of questions in that industry, which is engineering, they are not allowed on site for a period of time until they actually come back and pass their question set. So yeah, there are lots of ways that type of issue can be handled.
Thank you. Callum, is that something you can help us with as well?
Yes, absolutely. So Safe Forestry already has a form for the managers to use when they're checking the FISA guides with a contractor, and it's backed up with photographic evidence. So if they're doing any type of paper-based check of the FISA guides with the contractor, they can then take a photo. It asks them which guides have been checked. They can then comment on anything that was brought up within any of the guide checks, and then they can take a photograph and they both sign it off, so it's verified by the manager and by the person being checked. But I would like to go a little bit further into the question itself, and we need to be careful when we're producing what is effectively an audit of a person's competency. The question infers that a template be created for a Forest Works manager to ask specific questions relating to the FISA guides themselves to gauge an operator's level of competence. Now that creates kind of 2 issues, not just for me, I'm sure other people when they read the question think the same. An operator can study for this type of audit because it's just based on what will be written in the guides without any proof of actual operating competency. So it's only really addressing the underpinning knowledge of that individual, not the practical ability. And I know it is a part of a process, but it certainly shouldn't be the process that we fully rely on. Secondly, the Forest Works manager or supervisor asking the questions would be reading off a pre-made script, and they could also study for this and actually be very inexperienced themselves because they're just reading off a pre-made script. So we need to be quite careful what that question has asked. That's the way I read it anyway. We're trying to get away from that kind of pre-made format, and it doesn't really help the progression of a Forest Works manager if they're just reading it off bat. So it would only really become a tick box experience then with no real integrity. For me, a competency check of an operator should involve the assessment of their underpinning knowledge and evidence of practical ability and structured training they've attended. To have maximum value and effect, the check itself should be carried out by a competent person in the area that has been checked. Safe Forestry will have example documents to allow contractors and managers to comply with health and safety law, and a lot of them will be taken from FISA themselves, so you'll be able to access them on there. There'll be example risk assessments, health and safety policies, and forms of how to assess competency of operators. So I kind of contradict myself a little bit there, but I'm just putting a word of caution out there. If we do go down that route, we have to have the ability to access something that can facilitate it, but we need to be very careful that the competency level is matched between the operator and the supervising person. So we can have the procedures and means of facilitating it, but we must be mindful not to leave a gap in competency throughout the process of doing so. So that's what I've got to say on that one.
Thank you. I'm aware there's more questions on the chat, but what I'm going to do is just finish the pre-submitted ones and then I'll come back to the chat. So how do you know when there should be more than one FWM acting on behalf of the landowner, particularly on a more complex site covering harvesting, haulage and restock? And how can the landowner be sure of the competency of the FWM on site? Okay, if we can go to Matthew Whitehead on the panel, Mike Yerbury and Andy Sloss, but if we can go to Matthew first, please.
Yeah, no problem. For the first part of the question, I think as a landowner, you can have kind of a process in place during the tendering stage to identify the competence of the forest works manager. So that may be kind of a simple health and safety questionnaire that the forest works manager completes to identify what skill sets he can offer, and if he hasn't got those skill sets, what processes he's got in place to kind of manage that. But I think when it comes down to the second part of the question, how can the landowner be sure of the competency of the forest works manager on the site? That will kind of be identified through the monitoring of the forest works manager and how he's managing that work site and how much involvement he's having in the planning of the works, whether that's at the pre-commencement stage or during the site activities.
Thank you, Matthew. Mike, would you have anything to add to that for us, please?
Yeah, thanks, Gillian. It's just coming in, I guess, on the part separate to Matthew, where we're looking at more than one forest works manager on a site. I guess a good example to that would be, so if you have a forest works manager very comfortable working on sites, flat topography, but then they're presented with a site that's got an area of flat topography with quite a challenging steep slope. You might want to dovetail two forest managers in together, one that's got a greater level of competency working on the steep slope. If you do that, and that's a real challenging situation, you've got to be red hot on your communication between both FWMs, and those FWMs communicating then with contractors, with landowners, and subcontractors, so any of the other duty holders on the site. But ultimately, it's a responsibility of the organisation, that it's the organisation, as Kathy had said earlier, that takes on that role as FWM. And then what we do as organisations is discharge task level responsibilities to individuals that we deem to be competent to carry out and oversee those tasks. So it's incumbent on the organisation to ensure that they've got the right processes in place to check and to verify that those FWMs are fit and competent to carry out the tasks.
Thank you. Andy, would you have anything more to add as well?
Not a great deal of what's there, just to reiterate, we would do the same thing. FWM it would be FLS, and we have a lot of different people with experiences and knowledge that we would tap on to be able to give us input to that. And I would definitely back up that if you're going to have more than one FWM or more than one person advising on a site, that there's at least one person who's clearly given the responsibility for the communication, just so that things don't get confused.
Thank you. And then another landowner one that's come in. How can the landowner be confident of the chainsaw competency of the contractor on site? And how can they check with the FWM what checks the FWM has carried out? Matthew, are you able to help us with this? And then actually, Callum, if you could give us your view from the contractor. But Matthew first, please.
Yeah, no problem. So I think the first thing we need to identify is that the forest works manager is responsible for the health and safety on the work site, and the landowner is there to monitor the activities to ensure that the wider part of the forest and other users of that forest do not conflict with the forest works manager's activities. However, during that kind of process that will occur during the tendering stage, we have an opportunity to question the competence of the forest works manager and the contractor he's going to engage. But also during the kind of the pre-commencement meeting process and the sharing of the risk assessment and method statements, we would expect to kind of see evidence of operator competence, whether that's kind of identifying which operators will be undertaking which activities on the sites. But also, if you're kind of using the new technology that's coming out there through the apps, etc., that may be kind of a lot more easier being able to view that information of individual operators. But during the work site, If we identified an issue where the Forest Works manager was not supervising the site actively, or an incident occurred on that work site, then that may be a point where we may ask for further evidence of competence around an operator to kind of ensure that those processes are in place.
Thank you. Callum, would you be able to give us a bit more on that from the contractor's perspective?
Well, yeah, I can, but it won't be much, to be honest. I mean, I just had a look at the question and thought it wasn't really aimed at me. But what I would expect, you know, from reading the guidance on managing health and safety in forestry and the rules there, you would expect as a minimum to have the FISA guides checked, a competency check policy maybe from the Forest Works manager companies, and evidence of operator logbooks, risk assessments, maintenance they've done, any inspection forms, that kind of thing, all adds up to proof of competency. So there's sort of three main fields I would hope to be able to access from the Forest Works managers.
Thank you. If I can go back to the questions on the chat, we've got one that's come in. What qualification must the FWM have to assess the competence of a subcontractor? And then underneath they've put on chainsaw operations. Chris Pike, if you're still with us, are you able to help us with that?
I am. I can give you a view on that, Gillian. Others may also wish to chip in. The way we're approaching this is we're giving all our managers, we've got through a fair few and we've still got some to go, some basic chainsaw awareness, so they know what basics to look for. We're also introducing the competency system across our chainsaw operations. So they know they've got the basics. They're not assessing them to an NPTC standard. They're looking for, see if there's the sort of the things that they've been told to look for. And if they've got any concerns and the operator isn't there to chat through them, then we've got our chainsaw champions, as Tina outlined in the presentation, that have got practical experience of using the saws, that can, and they're regionally based. They can go out with the manager, talk with the chainsaw operator, and have a bit more of a look. But we're not assessing them to NPTC standards. We've got that sort of two-stage process.
Thank you, Chris. Would anyone else from the panel have anything to add on that response? Okay, if I move to the next one that's showing on the chat, we've got another one come in. Chainsaw refresher updates. Will they still be a requirement even with the logbook evidence? Again, don't want to keep throwing everything at Callum, but it may well be that. Is there anyone else on the panel that would like to help us with that? And then we will come back to you, Callum. They're all being flung at you, I'm afraid. Ian Calvert, would you have a response on that one? Ian's maybe not with us at the moment.
Sorry, John. I thought that was going to Callum. I didn't realise that was going to come to me. What was the question there?
Chainsaw refresher updates. Will that still be a requirement even with logbook evidence?
Well, yes, I would suggest it would be. That's an independent. There's always changes in techniques and development, and an independent training and assessment event fits in with someone logging the work that they've been doing in the period. Yeah, as far as I envisage it, yes.
Gillian, can I just sort of come in as well before we go to Callum for a fuller answer? From a Two Hills perspective, with the logbooks we're introducing, yes, I would expect chainsaw refresher training to be still undertaken until the contractors move to the full auditing process that Callum has modelled for us this afternoon, and where the operator is then getting a different style of update. So just the logbook itself, I don't think takes us away from refresher training. It's a step, but I would be looking for that full implementation of a Callum style auditing system, the level system.
Thank you. Kathy, would you like to just chip in before we go to Callum?
Yes, I think it needs to be looked at sort of as a whole, because refresher training comes from an industry requirement which is established in one of the HSCI and DG's chainsaws at work. leaflet, and it doesn't just talk about refresher training, it talks about upskill training as well, which obviously with the CPD element, etc., and the assessments that would occur if you were following the type of system that Callum explains may well be acceptable by the regulator anyway, but it would have to be justified, and it would have to be based on the fact that that person has had perhaps previous relevant refresher training on the basics and now is upskilling. So I think it is a whole story. That's something that somebody has to look at when they're looking at the skill sets of what's required of the work they're doing on site, etc.
Thank you. Callum?
Yeah, for me, I don't have to do chainsaw refresher training, and that is because I've moved to a completely competency-based system. So what that does is we do weekly logbooks and we do daily risk assessment of our tasks. So each chainsaw operator will assess what they're doing, and then we also follow the chainsaw competency system and carry out the auditing process accordingly on each chainsaw operator. So that is seen as a much more robust version rather than just attending a one-day refresher every 5 years, which we all know is extremely generic. And unless that refresher training became far more specific to the individuals that were being refreshed, what we do with the competency system is a far more, I provide CPD within that for my operators as well. So as some of them are coming up through the lower levels, we provide focused CPD on, for example, holding cuts, felling edge trees, using jacks, steep ground working, that kind of thing. So the system we have in place is very focused on the individual, so we don't have to do refresher updates.
Thank you. Just on the chat, we have another question that's coming. I know you've answered it on the chat, Callum, but if you could just summarise for those who maybe can't see the chat. It's the question that's asked about, how can we expect competent chainsaw contractors to pick up and use a high level of IT when they've not necessarily had a lot of training? And also the question goes on to ask, will this sort of help and assistance be available for Welsh speakers? And is this going to be an additional cost to contractors? Callum, are you able to just give us your answer, please, on that you've already given on the chat?
Yeah, so the questions come in from Lucy, and from a safe forestry perspective, we have a Facebook page and we also have a YouTube channel, and we have put several tutorials onto both pages on how to use the app from a contractor's and from a manager's perspective. So it shows how to populate your profile, etc., submit a form, how to carry out a chainsaw logbook entry. So there's video tutorials on there. We do not have it in a Welsh format yet, but it would be something we're prepared to look at. And yes, it does cost. So Safe Forestry has a subscription fee of £10 a month, which basically works out at £2.50 a week. And what we hope is that managers will help contractors who are engaging with a system like this, because we are not pushing them, we're encouraging them to start recording their ongoing competency. And they are then, if they do that, they're also letting the managers prove that they're managing the competency of their operators. So it shouldn't just be a cost that's allocated just to the contractor. It should be a cost that is helped to be met by the management companies, because they're also winning out of a system such as this.
Thank you. And I can see, Matthew, your hand's gone up, but I'm just actually going to field your question you've raised on the chat as well. And that is where you're asking, can we have examples of current support that FWMs are providing contractors in this transition? So Matthew, would you like to, you've got your hand up, do you want to come in? I'm also raising your question, but if you'd like to just have unmute yourself and raise.
Yeah, it was just kind of going back to Lucy's question. So I think it was an opportunity for me to kind of share my experience with the pilot we run within pond trellis harvesting in relation to the technology part. So when we had that pilot and we were running the apps, it was, from my perspective as a Forest Works manager, a lot of time I committed at the start of the project with the operators, because as Lucy highlighted, a lot of the operators weren't IT literate. They hadn't used apps like that. But what I found is when I committed quite a few hours at the start of the process, kind of giving them an hour session, introducing them into the app and the basic functions, and then maybe a couple of follow-up visits showing them how to input information, it was a bit of time that I had to delegate at the start of the process. But what I found with the operators, they did pick it up quite quickly. But the kind of key thing I learned going through the process is you've got to take it in small steps and not try and throw it all on much at once. So kind of taking an approach where we just got them to use the Safe Forestry app to kind of sign in, sign out to site. And then we introduced the kind of task assessment in the morning. And as we went on then over the next couple of weeks, we introduced new forms. But it was going there at 7 o'clock in the morning, meeting with the guys, talking through the form, and then following it up and checking it as I did my weekly visits to ensure that they had no problems or they were recording the right information, etc. But initially, there is a bit of time that you need to delegate it, whether that's with the support of the Forest Works manager or the contractor on their own. I would suggest the Forest Works manager supports them in that process. But I think it is valuable and it is a lot easier process using an app in a paper format. And that's kind of led on to the question I put in the chat, which is kind of seeing if there's other examples of which Forest Works managers could share with the group about how they've supported their contractors through this process.
If we can go to the FWMs on the panel, is that something you can help us with, Joey?
Sorry, I missed the end of that question.
It's around just that help, Joey, to contractors as we're trying to encourage recording of competency. And is that something you run over with them on site?
So similarly, we've been trialing a couple of apps and have been following a similar process where we've started getting people logged into the apps as a very basic baseline so that people are understanding the way that the apps use, and then gradually introducing new functions and increasing the amount of things which we'd like recorded within the app. I've familiarized myself with all of the apps that we are using and all the recording styles we're using, and then I'm there to provide support to the operators. We've also facilitated direct contact between some of the operators and the app developers or myself, so that they can have so they can request or report any issues they've had throughout. So far, we've had pretty good uptake on it, and operators seem to be finding it fairly straightforward. Overall, the apps are a lot, especially so far, we found that the apps, if you can use something like WhatsApp or you can use something like iMessage, a lot of the apps have similar elements within them, so they are fairly rapid for people to pick up. But basically, being there on the end of the phone to provide support or on-site assistance as required has been one of the ways that we've been doing that.
Thank you. Stephen Bartlett, could you give us your answer?
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that I've been involved in sort of mobile working for many, many years, and this is a concern that is still being expressed, but I would counsel people not to worry too much. We had one situation where we were on site with a Finnish operator, and we gave him the app, and 10 minutes later he was up and running, and we've never heard from him since. So it is, I would counsel everyone just not to doubt the ability of their fellow workers. You'll be surprised how skilled people are. But it is right to be concerned, and Egger's approach has been very wise, and you know, let people take it at their time, but some people will go very quickly.
Thank you. Just on the chat again, Drake has kindly raised just some reflection on the FWM skill level, suggesting that the FISA Chainsaw Supervisor course is one route that the FWM can gain some chainsaw awareness, and certainly that's how we're viewing that course, as that course needs to be, because it's only a one-day course. So certainly that can provide some awareness training. And as we've heard earlier, and we'll go back briefly to Chris Pike of Till Hill, certainly chainsaw skills and development of that for the FWM are crucial. Chris, would you have any more to add on that, just on reflection on the use of a chainsaw training for the FWM?
Not really, Gillian. The one-day course that we're providing all our managers is pretty much the FISA course anyway. So, yeah, I'd agree with what was been said there.
Thank you, Chris. I'm really conscious of time, everybody. It's brilliant. We've had such a huge audience with us. It is 5 o'clock, well, nearly 5 past now, and we've had a fantastic panel who've all given their time. I don't want to cut off before anyone's questions. If you've still got more questions, I am conscious our panel have been brilliant, and it is Friday as well for everyone. If we can ask people, if you've got more questions, if you would like to submit them to me at info@ukfisa.com, I can then forward them to our panel. We can get an answer for you and we can share that widely on our e-update as a continuation of this process, because I am conscious that this has been fantastically well attended, and clearly the competency questions are ones that are on everybody's mind. So please don't feel that I'm chopping this off before you've had a chance to raise a question. Please do put that to us on email and we'll make sure that you still do get a response, and we'll share that very widely. So thank you to our panel and thank you to all our attendees.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and good night. Hope you all have a good weekend.
Thanks all.